Okay, so in this video we're going to handle the double pendulum moving in 2 dimensions, and we're going to use Lagrangian mechanics to do it. We'll draw out the physical system, look at the geometry of it, use that to write the Lagrangian, and then derive the equations of motion. After that, we'll look at the small angle approximation. What we'll find is a pair of coupled ordinary differential equations that are linear, and we'll be able to solve for the normal modes and the normal frequencies using matrix mechanics and linear algebra as a result. Okay, so I've drawn a diagram here of the double pendulum, which hopefully makes the geometry of the system clear. Specifically, the first step when you're doing any of these problems is to pick a convenient set of generalized coordinates, which may not, and in this case aren't, just the usual Cartesian coordinates. And it can take some skill and experimentation to know exactly which ones are the best to select. Given the way I've drawn it out here, I hope it's clear that the simplest way to describe the state of the pendulum, at least with rigid rods like this, is just by these 2 angles here. So what would have been 4 variables is reduced to 2 generalized coordinates that very directly tell you exactly what state the system is in, and they're easy to relate via trigonometry to these x's and y's, which we know how to write the kinetic energy in terms of. So bothering to do that trigonometry gets us this, and then we can straightforwardly use the chain rule to take the time derivatives to get the needed x and y velocities here. We then already know how to write the kinetic energy in terms of x's and y's, which allows us to get the kinetic energy in terms of the generalized coordinates via a simple substitution, which I've done here. And then after that, it's a matter of some algebra and simplification, and then the application of a couple of trig identities to get it into its simplest form. Of course, we have the obvious Pythagorean identities for these 2 terms, but this one actually also simplifies down quite nicely as well, but it's with a somewhat less common identity, specifically this sum angle identity here. Inserting all that in ultimately gets us to this much simpler result in terms of the generalized coordinates. Writing out the potential energy in terms of the generalized coordinates is quite straightforward. It really is just a substitution. We don't need to mess around with any time derivatives. And with the kinetic energy and the potential energy expressed in terms of our convenient generalized coordinates, we can then immediately write down what the Lagrangian is in terms of them, which is this. And then by taking some simple derivatives, we can extend that to the equations of motion. We do have 2 generalized coordinates here, so we're going to be getting 2 equations of motion. This is the first one, and then quite similarly, this is the second one. So we've got our equations of motion now. These equations of motion are clearly coupled and deeply nonlinear. They're really quite complicated. You would realistically need a computer to actually solve them here, and that's really not that surprising because the double pendulum in classical mechanics is famously one of the simplest systems that exhibits real chaos. It does still impress me that you can write down equations that aren't any more complicated than this, that do actually have what it takes to describe chaotic motion. While we may not be solving these equations of motion exactly by hand, we can still extract some useful information from them by hand, and it's a useful mathematical physics exercise to do it. Specifically, we'll do it by linearizing the equations of motion by making the small angle approximation. Now, when I say linearizing the equations of motion, I mean exactly that. The equations of motion end up linear. Of course, that then corresponds to a quadratic Lagrangian. Now, you can do this in 2 ways. You can either expand the Lagrangian to quadratic order and then calculate the equations of motion from that, or you can expand the equations of motion we got from the original Lagrangian to linear order. Either way works. It doesn't really matter. I've written out both here. Now, if you think about it, if we're dealing with small angles, that also realistically means small angular velocities. So when I mean the small angle approximation, or expanding the Lagrangian to quadratic order, I mean we're expanding it to quadratic order in thetas or theta dots. Either one counts. So since we've got a theta 1 dot here and a theta 2 dot here, we just keep the constant term in the cosine Taylor expansion. But here we have no theta dots in front or thetas, so we expand the cosines to quadratic order in order to get the whole Lagrangian expanded out to quadratic order. Now you can see here and here there are constant terms. Those are just potential energy shifts and they don't really matter, so we can ignore them. That'll actually make the math easier later on. And another thing we're going to do to make the math easier later on is set L2 and L1 equal to each other. Now we could do the same linear algebra that we're going to do later to solve the case of differing rod lengths, but it does make already tricky algebra even more tricky, and it doesn't really add to the exercise anyway. So if you want to work that out, well, you're going to have to handle that one. This is the Lagrangian in the small angle approximation, ignoring the constant potential energy shifts and with equal rod lengths. We could then use this, as I said, to calculate these just via the normal Euler-Lagrange equations, but also it's pretty easy to just expand these equations to linear order in theta or theta dot and get the same thing, remembering to set L1 and L2 equal to each other, and of course the same goes for the second one. Now that we have these equations, we can actually start extracting information from them. They're linear, there's techniques for that. And one of the most common approaches to take here is to calculate the normal modes and normal frequencies, and then study any other motion that it gives in terms of linear combinations of those normal modes. Normal modes and normal frequencies describe dynamic situations where all the degrees of freedom of a linear system are oscillating sinusoidally at a single specific frequency. And then, of course, because the system is linear, as I said, other motions can then be described as linear combinations of those normal modes. Now, when you're dealing with a system with multiple moving parts, it's actually kind of an odd idea for everything to be oscillating at a single frequency. And the actual dynamical equations of motion won't allow that at just any frequency. There are only specific frequencies, and usually a finite number of them, at which a system will allow that. And we can use the equations of motion to calculate that out. Because we're dealing with a constant frequency sinusoidal wave, we can insert just some sinusoidal wave at some frequency omega for both theta and theta dot, and then divide out the sinusoidal function to get this. And at this point we're left with a linear system of equations, so we can start applying linear algebraic techniques in order to solve that out. We can easily write this set of linear equations in terms of matrices. We get an equation like this if we define these tilde quantities as I have here. If you insert those back in, you'll find that you do actually just get these two equations. It's a good exercise to do that. Now, it turns out that we actually don't even need to bother calculating the equations of motion in order to solve this system. If we just remember this form here, that is the equation we ultimately get, we can extract the T-tilde and V-tilde quantities directly from the terms in the Lagrangian by noting the fact that T and V can be written like this in terms of T-tilde and V-tilde. So we can just actually read it straight off the Lagrangian. It is important to note, however, that you can make a mistake doing this. If we just look at T here, we might be tempted to put this in just one of the off-diagonal components and leave the other one equal to 0. But that doesn't give the right equations of motion, so you do have to pay attention in order to make sure that you're not implying the wrong equations. Regardless of how you get your T-tilde and V-tilde, after you do, it's literally just straightforward linear algebra machinery. We know that this is just an eigenvalue problem with eigenvalue omega squared, and we know how to calculate that. We just set the determinant equal to 0, a simple application of the quadratic formula after a little bit of algebra gives us our answer right away. Now I did skip a few non-obvious steps, or what many might consider to be non-obvious steps in going from here to here. I've written out the algebraic manipulations that I did of the quantity under the square root here. And with these eigenvalues calculated out, the normal frequencies, we can move on to calculating the normal modes, which are just the eigenvectors, and it again is therefore just normal linear algebra machinery. However, this is a fairly nasty, complicated looking set of equations, so it's helpful to go about your algebra carefully. If you make the right steps at the right time, then it stays manageable. If you don't, then it can get pretty nasty, which is why a video like this is useful. The next somewhat non-obvious step is to open up this factor of m, and to write this one as m over m, and then open up the factor of m in the numerator, and then simplify accordingly. It gets you down to here. Then we can write out the equations individually. The first one gives us this useful fact, and we look to the second one to see what else we can find, but it turns out by multiplying it by this factor here, we find that it's actually just the same as the first one. It gives us no additional information. And from that, we can deduce this normal mode from this original normal frequency that we had up here. So we're making a lot of progress. We do still have this normalization constant to deal with, and I'll talk about that later. Before we get to that, we do still need to calculate the other normal mode corresponding to omega minus squared. The process is exactly the same, and again the equations turn out to be the same, and we get a form very similar here. Now we can move on to talking about what these normalization constants are. Because we're not in quantum mechanics, we don't just default normalize them to 1. There isn't as much of a mandated normalization here, but there actually is a standard that people have grown accustomed to using, and we'll use that same standard. That standard is simply to set this quantity here, written in terms of the T-tilde matrix, equal to 1. And when we work out what that implies about n plus, we get this. So this is our final normal mode vector for the omega plus squared eigenvalue. And doing the same thing for the omega minus squared value, well, we get this normalization constant. It's pretty straightforward, if a bit messy. And with that, we're finished with the problem. I hope this video helped you understand the famous double pendulum better. Thanks for watching.